All right. I was born October 23rd, 1942, in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I found my birth certificate and hospital bill in my mother's baby book to me. And it cost $49. That's including medicine, hospital stay, and doctor. That's a hell of a difference between today.
Yeah.
The only remembrance I have of Indiana is I can remember walking in the snow and hanging on my dad's finger. He had a glove on. Remember my grandparents' house had a big stairway and they had a gate on so kids couldn't go up or down the stairs. I remember being on the back porch, I guess my grandmother's house, with my cousin Patty, and we were eating ants of all things. We flew out to California in 1948. I think it was a DC-4 or 3, one of the two. And I remember the stewardess asked me if I wanted to go up and see the cockpit. And the cockpit door was open, and I was sitting there and I looking at all the bright lights and everything up there, and it scared the shit out of me, so I didn't want to do it. I wish I had it now. We landed in Ontario Airport. The reason that we moved to California is my dad got a transfer with the job that he was working in Indiana, and they opened up a new plant in California. We stayed at the Orange Hotel, which is on the corner of Lemon and Hope Boulevard in Ontario. At the time, it was the biggest, most luxurious hotel in the area, and I remember it had like a little shopping center around it. The bottom floor on the outside were shoe stores and dress stores and clothing stores and stuff all the way around to help travelers. We stayed there for approximately a week, and then we rented a house. And for the life of me, I can't remember where it was we rented it. But I think the first house that I remember was on B Street, just north of Foothill or north of Hope Boulevard and west or east of Benson. And it was just a little small house, but it was on a big lot, and there was a lot of empty lots. There wasn't many people at that time. I can remember the winter time. They would smudge, and you'd wake up in the morning and you'd blow your nose and it'd be black coming out of your nose, and you could hardly see the sunshine first thing in the morning. And you'd look up towards the mountains, and it was just solid orange groves all the way up to where San Antonio Dam is now, and you'd see these red spots within the groves of the smudge pots burning. I remember they used to fly what must have been in the late 40s or early 50s. Ontario Airport had an Air National Guard division there, and they were flying F-86 fighters, which is what they used in combat in Korea. And they would fly over there and break the sound barrier. They couldn't do it flying level. They'd get up real high and then dive. And at that time, people didn't care. They didn't do anything about it. And all the windows would rattle and everything else, and it was really exciting. As far as B Street goes, I remember we used to have to walk to school. B Street ended about 300 yards from where our house was, and it ended up being orange groves all the way to, I think it was called Central School or something like that. It was on a corner of Vine and C Street, C or D, C I guess it was. And we'd walk to school through these orange groves and pick oranges. And
your mom used to take you to get ice cream.
Pardon me?
And your mom used to take you to get ice cream.
Yeah, there was an ice cream store close by, and we used to go get some ice cream.
I was going to ask that. Your mom and dad were still married when you moved?
They were still married at that time, yes. From B Street, and then finally they got bus service, and I'd walk down and I'd stand on the corner of B and Benson, and Benson Avenue was just an asphalt strip. You just, on a clear day, you could see it all the way up to the foothills, and it was nothing but orange groves on both sides of it.
Mm-hmm. But why would your mother take you and leave you for ice cream?
I don't remember.
You said she used to get you the ice cream and leave.
And leave him there?
Not a,
and meet other guys.
well, I wasn't going to get into stuff like that.
Well, that's what I want them to know.
Well, anyhow, my mother started having an affair with a guy that had a combination ice cream store and grinder sandwich store on Hope Boulevard.
Where Antonio's was?
No, on down towards Central Avenue. Guy had a great big picture window in his house. I think it was the same guy. But from B Street, we moved to the corner of D, and it was just south of John Galvin Park. And that's where they ended up divorcing, was when we lived in that street. And at that time there was vineyards as far as you could see, but they were grape vineyards. Because we were out east, on the east portion of Ontario, which was more desert. And so just grape vineyards, and we used to run around the grape vineyards and hunt snakes. And I remember one time we killed this great big gopher snake and drug it back to the yard, and we were right on the corner. The school bus would go right around the corner. We had that snake laying out there in the yard, and everybody, ooh boy, look at that, you know. But at that time, my sister Sally had a back operation, and she had a cast from her waist all the way to her shoulders. I remember we'd wrestle on the grass with her, and you couldn't hurt her because she had that cast on. My dad and mother separated for whatever reason, and he started drinking very heavily, and he and I were, well, let me back up a little bit. When they separated, I remember going to the bus stop or the bus depot in Ontario, and my sister Sally went with my mother, and I stayed with my dad, and they left in the bus, and we got in the car and drove back to the house, and he got into drinking pretty heavily, and there was just he and I for I don't know how many months or weeks or whatever it was, but there wasn't any food in the house.
Then?
Pardon me?
Where did you live then?
That was on the corner of D and whatever that, no, just below John Galvin Park. And there wasn't any food in the house, and so I'd get up and go to school, and the only thing I knew how to make was popcorn. So I popped popcorn and put them when everybody had metal lunch boxes. I'd take popcorn to school, and I'd trade kids for apples or part of a sandwich for popcorn. I remember that. And then I remember one time my dad was in the back bedroom, and he was complaining about it. He said, I can't, he smoked all the time, and he said, I can't get this damn lighter to work. So I went down and I got the lighter, and I got some lighter fluid, and I filled it up, and I, not realizing I had lighter fluid over both hands. And so I walked down the hallway and walked to the room and lit the thing up. My hands caught on fire. I mean, it just lit up the whole room. And then another time I stuck a bobby pin into a wall socket, and that was a mistake. But then finally my Uncle Ralph came over and brought us up to my grandparents' house, which they had bought on 9th Street in Upland. They moved out there in 49 or 50, and they had a great big deep garage, so they built a little room just walled off the part of the garage and made a room back there. And my dad and I moved into that. I remember they bought some old GI army cots, or actually there were beds with springs in them, and a mattress on top, and every time you'd move it'd go you're in hell. But we lived there for, I think I was 7, from 7 till I was 17, we lived there. And we had a little kerosene heater that had a round wick in it, and to raise the fire, make the hotter rather, you just raise the wick up and it would get bigger. And it gets cold in California, and I remember one night I woke up and had to take a leak, and we used to just crack the door and piss out the door. And one white night I thought, I don't want to go out there, so I thought, well, I'll just piss on this heater and it evaporate. Boy, was that a mistake. That stunk up the whole room for a day or two. Then we got a propane heater, but anyhow, when we were living there, he was still drinking an awful lot, and he got involved in this woman in Pomona someplace, and she lived there. No, she lived in Upland. That's right. And he started getting involved with her, and so she talked him into taking her back to Oklahoma where his folks were. And so we drove all the way back there. There was she and she and her daughter, and then my dad and I, and got back there and lived there for about a week, and that was all over with. She told us to leave, and they were dirt poor farmers, I guess. They had an outhouse, they had electricity, but they had no water. They had a well on the back porch, and it was just a hole in the porch, and had kind of like an A-frame over it, and you drop this pipe down inside. It was probably 4 or 5 inch diameter, about 6 foot long, and had a valve in the bottom of it, and it'd go down and fall into the water, and then when it was full, you'd pull it back up and put the water into a bucket. And they had an outhouse, like I say, no indoor plumbing. So we had to drive back from Oklahoma, and we got someplace in the Sierras, and again my dad was drinking all the time, and we stopped at this motel. I remember it was mountainous, and checked in, and the lady really gave me a sorrowful look, like, you poor son of a gun. And we spent the night, and the next morning she was waiting for us to come out of the room, and she came over and tried to talk my dad out of driving, stay there and let us take care of Jim for you for a while.
Because he was obviously drunk, is
Yeah,
that?
he was obviously drunk. So we took off, and it started snowing like crazy, and back in those days, all the windshield wipers operated on vacuum, so when you gave the car gas, there was no vacuum, and the windshield wipers wouldn't work. You go downhill, and they just work like a son of a gun. But we would start going up this mountain pass, and I'd have to stand up and hang out the window and get the snow off of the windshield. I couldn't reach the driver's side, so we had to look out the passenger side. And so we got home and pulled into my grandparents' yard there, and went in the back door, and there was an old custom that you threw your hat in a ring to see if you were going to be accepted back into the clan, so to speak. And my dad threw a hat in a ring, and my Uncle Ralph picked up and threw it back at him. But they never got along very good. But anyhow, we moved into that room in the back. My Uncle Ralph and his wife and 2 kids, Patty and Jerry, were living in that house, a small 3-bedroom home. So it was really crowded, but we had to sleep in the garage. Originally there was no heat back there. In the summertime, of course, there was no air conditioning. But, just one of those things. And then they decided that they were going to be rabbit farmers. So they built a great big barn and put rabbit cages in, and we had a bunch of animals. And you had chores every morning that you did. And I'd go down and I'd feed the rabbits, and I'd feed the chickens and this and that, and then come up and eat breakfast and go to school. Or in the summertime, I'd do the same thing and eat breakfast, and we always used to make our own slingshots out of the Y branch of a tree, and you put your slingshot in your back pocket and you take off. My grandmother said, "You be home by 5." That was it. We were gone. There wasn't pedophiles and all that kind of stuff then. Then my dad started getting his shit together, and he got a job with a company called Benton Plating, and did well with it. And then he got hired onto a company that was called Pyramid originally, and he started there as a draftsman. And then they were bought out by another company, and they built a new building, and he was in charge of the building of the building. He was the plant. They made him plant manager. It was a big place. They had about 125, 150 employees. But taught me a lesson about unions. He was saying that they'd be out there, watching the construction, make sure it was doing the way they want it done. And it was all steel construction with I-beam posts and then I-beam rafters and shit. And one guy would go up. They had a crane operator. He'd pull the rafter over to the post. One guy would go up, and they call it a pickle, which is a long tapered punch, and he'd punch it in the hole and hold it in place. He'd come back down. Another guy'd go up and put the nuts and bolts on it. He'd come back down. The third guy'd go up and torque all the nuts and bolts. Used to drive my dad crazy. In the meantime, when he started getting his shit together, he met Betty, and Well, prior to that, before he met her and he was getting sober, we used to go camping all the time. And we'd go to Whitewater Canyon, and it was out in the middle of the desert, and we'd go out there and camp over the weekend and hike, and all you'd bring was some bacon, a can of beans, and a cast iron skillet. And we'd build a fire and cook dinner on the cast iron skillet, and then when you're done, you just wash it out with sand, get all the grease out of it. And we had some good times out there. We found a spring where the burros were going to, and they'd actually licked a trough into the bowl, like a bowl full of water, and it had a stream coming down to that bowl, which had been running for eons because it looked like a half a pipe. I remember that, and we spotted it because we could see one green palm tree from across the canyon. But we had a good time up there, and we spent a lot of time together. And then he met Betty, and let me back up one more time too. When he met Betty, I was working at the Western Hose Stables on 13th Street in Upland, and that was a place where you rented horses and you go for rides. And I would buck the stalls, and then if they needed some guides to go out with them, I'd go out with the people on the horses and show them where to go, or maybe take them the whole way and all that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, the guy that owned that place, Joe Bennis, his son got drafted in Vietnam and was killed, which was unfortunate. But I would feed the horses. They got to roll a load of hay in. Remember this? And they had these great big stacks of bales of hay, and we'd have to kick them down onto the ground. A lot of times they would break, and if they didn't, you have to break them open. And almost every bale had a dead snake in it, from where they harvest this hay. But then he met Betty, going to that, met her at that stables, and that kind of, it was, like I say, it was my fault. I was jealous of her, and I was losing his attention, and the only one I had. And but it wasn't too bad. I'm jumping around too much. Prior to him meeting her, when we were going, I think was what she wanted me to point out, and he was really having a hard time. We had no money, and we would go school shopping at the Goodwill, and I'd get one pair of shoes a year, and when he'd buy them, they were about that much too long for me, and I have to wear them all the way through the year. And in the summertime, my feet were growing, and he'd take a knife and he'd cut the toes off of them, make them from about here forward with toes hanging out, so you could wear them. We didn't have any money, and it was a tough time, but a lot of people gone through a lot of tougher times. But again, like I say, when he started getting his shit together, he got into horses. We had some horses there at my grandparents'. We were still living in that garage, and had some good times and some bad times. I bought actually he bought it for me, a 1952 Harley 74, which with a tank shift, was a 650-pound motorcycle, and I was 15, weighed 120 pounds. And trying to get it home that after we bought it, had to slam on the brakes at a stoplight, and I killed the motor. And here we are out on Central Avenue, and neither one of us could start the damn thing. And finally, a guy from the gas station came out and started it up for us. Drove it on home, and in the morning I was going to Chaffee High School at that time. And in the morning I would have it in the garage, and there was a big concrete driveway going down to the garage. And I'd push that thing all the way up to the top of the driveway because I couldn't kick it, too late. And I'd coast back down and try to jump start it. And I'd do that until I saw the bus starting to turn the corner. Then I'd put it away and run down to the bus stop. And if I got it started, then I'd ride it to school. And I remember I'd park across the street, or a bunch of, I thought I was a real badass at the time. I was 120 pounds, soaking wet. But, and I'd go over there and I'd sit and smoke cigarettes with them, and so get time to go back to go to school when the bell rang. I'd say, hey, you ever started one of these things? No, can I try that? And I said, sure, go ahead. Okay, thanks. And I'd do the same thing after school until I finally found the knack, of getting it started. But as far as school goes, I went to Upland High School my freshman year, Chaffee High School, Southbourne junior year, and then I graduated from Montclair in 1960. The motorcycle I had, I think, for a year, and again, like I say, I thought I was a badass, 120 pounds, and we crashed a party in Montclair and got into a fight, and I don't remember doing it, but the guy's father got hit in the head with a beer bottle, and they called the cops, and they came up and arrested me at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I spent the night in jail, and that was not a pleasant thing. And the next day, my dad picked me up. I'll never forget this ride. At this time, ducktails were real popular. You'd put the hair like that, and you had a spit curl in the front. Of course, I had one, and black motorcycle jacket and all that crap. And he said, "Well, what do you think about that jail time?" I said, "I didn't like it at all." And he says, "If you don't get your shit together and change your ways and get rid of that motorcycle, that's where you're going to spend the majority of your life." And I was a junior in high school at that time. And I started thinking about that, and I thought, I think he's right. So I got rid of the motorcycle, and I bought a 52 Ford, and I went from a D and C average to a B average in 1 year. It really scared the shit out of me. Probably the best thing that ever happened to me. But then from there, when they got married in the summer of 1960, he came up to me, and in the meantime, we had moved into an apartment in Upland just before. I think we moved there in '59, and came up to me and he said, "We're getting married, and you're on your own." So he paid the rent for 2 or 3 months, and I had a couple of guys move in with me, and so I lived there until the rent was paid, and then the three of us got another apartment, and then went on from there. Went to Chaffee College for a couple of, well,
You
not quite
skipped
2
over
years.
the part where you had an apartment in Pomona. Your dad and you. 'Cause
My dad and I lived there for about 9 months, I think.
And I cleaned the apartment for you.
That's right, you did, yeah. Yeah, that's right, you did.
Like as a paid job, you'd go there and clean it?
Yeah.
Is that how you met him?
No.
No.
We've been going together since I was a freshman.
Gotcha.
That's right, I met your mother
So
in
you know him
Montclair
through the
High
badass
School.
stage?
No.
No. You guys kind of separated at that point?
No, I think he was junior high when I was out.
Oh, okay.
I met your mother in Montclair High School in '63, or
59.
'59, and we started dated on and off, more on than off, and then she graduated. We got married, what, a year after you graduated?
Not quite a year.
Not quite a year.
Due to the fact that you didn't want to get drafted.
Well, we were going to get married in June,
Right.
and then I had to take a pre-induction physical. And so we got married, and she was working and I was working. She was working at General Dynamics. And she called me and she said, "I got good news and bad news." And I knew I was ready to get a draft notice. And I said, "Okay, what's the bad news?" And she said, "Well, your draft notice came in. What's the good news?" I just came from the doctors, we're pregnant. So I missed Vietnam, which I don't regret. Other than that, I like I say, I kind of jumped over stuff, but anybody got any questions?
Sally and her friend and the 3 kids, came out from Oklahoma, or not Oklahoma, Indiana,
That
to
was with her,
Montclair.
that was her with her husband, her first husband.
No, that big guy was not her husband.
That was her first husband. Yes. That was when we were staying in Montclair,
Right.
and she came out. They had moved from Indiana to California.
Looked like it was from Oklahoma. They had stuff tied to the top of the car.
Yeah, they did. I assume they came from Indiana, and then they moved to Fresno, and then she divorced him. And when our grandmother died, they left Sally, I think it was $100,000 or $80,000 or something like that, and left me $20,000. And,
Your grandmother on your mother's side.
yes. And, she, came down to California. We were living in Rancho at the time, and, decided she wanted to live in California.
We were living in Montclair.
We were living in California. We were living in Rancho the second time she came down.
That when we all went down and visited
That's
them?
right. That's right. So we were living in Rancho, and she had her three kids, and at that time the two boys were nothing like they are today. Believe me, these guys were motorcycle thugs.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
I've heard the stories
and
from him.
so anyhow, we went down. They said, "Come Christmas time, why don't you come down? We'll have Christmas at our house." So we went down there, and the boys got drunk. One of them tried to throw the make on your sister, Jody.
Which would have been his cousin,
Yeah,
or is his cousin.
and somebody went to the hospital. They had to take somebody to the hospital. I can't remember who the hell that was. Somebody got sick or something like that. I can't remember if it was the daughter or what.
Maybe it was that big fat guy that she was living with.
Could have been. So anyhow, we left. You know, never heard anything from her for, I don't know, 6 or 8 months. Finally, she called me up and said, I need some help. She said, I want to get back to Fresno, but I don't have any money.
She was in Upland in an apartment at this time.
Yeah. Lived with this guy. And her youngest son was with her. The other two boys, the daughter.
Jason, I think is his
Jason,
name.
yeah.
What's his name?
Jason?
Jason, okay. And anyhow, I went down and I met him at this apartment. It's about 11 o'clock in the morning, and this guy goes into the kitchen and pours a 8-ounce glass about that full of scotch. And he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, you want a drink?" And I said, "No, I'm fine, thank you." And the little boy, Jason, I guess it was
He was
saying that-
7 or 8 at that time.
Hmm?
He was 7 or 8 at that time.
Him? I would guess, yeah, something like that. And they were talking about they got behind on the rent, and the landlord came in and threw them out and confiscated all their furniture and everything, which she had financed to begin with. And so Jason said, "They even took my bicycle. I don't have a bicycle." You know, I felt really bad for that kid. In fact, I came back and told her, I said, we ought to, what about if we take him over, and raise him? And then we thought, that would be too much trouble. But anyhow, I gave her $400, and she went on back to Fresno. She did call me up one time, not too long ago, and wanted to know how much she had loaned me. I had loaned her back in those days, and wanted to pay me back. And I said, "I don't remember. It wasn't that much money. Don't worry about it." I told her, I said, "Sally," I said, "put that money into a trust and earn interest off of it." And she said, "Well, I promised them the money." I said, "You're going to give it to them. You're just going to give it to them at a later date, and earn the interest off of it and give them a chance to mature a little bit, because I knew they were bikers." And she didn't do it. She gave away $30,000. I guess Dawn was the only one that did anything with it.
Now, when you were growing up, did you ever see her or your mom? The whole time it was just you and your dad?
The only time, no, I never, I saw her when I was with my grandparents. She came to California. As it turned out, she was pregnant for the first time. And so she came out to get consoled by my dad, I guess, I don't know. But I don't remember too much about that.
I thought they used to come visit when she was about a teenager.
The only time I saw my mother after she left in 49 or 50, something like that, was when she got transferred. She worked for an uncle, great uncle, who was a multi-millionaire in the Wabash Life Insurance Company. And she met this guy and married him that worked there also, and they transferred them to Phoenix, Arizona. So we drove back there to see him, to see her and to see her husband and to see my uncle and aunt. And
That's when we took the trip in the Datsun
Gosh.
station wagon.
no. we drove we flew over there. We flew to Phoenix, and we both complained about the flight because we landed at all these little airports, and they would fly down the runway to clear out the coyotes and shit like that. It was out in the desert.
Wow.
They landed at Palm Springs and they landed at Blythe, I think it was, and that's where they buzzed the airport first to make sure there wasn't anything there. And then we landed into Phoenix, and I was complaining about it, and I remember my Aunt Bibi said, "Well, why don't you drive a car back?" And I said, "I can't afford to rent a car," and they rented a car for me. You know, I remember it was a Chevy convertible, and we drove it back, and that was on the before the freeway was built. And all the bridges were about that wide. You know, and you don't want to pass a truck on one of those bridges. But the time that we drove that Nissan, the little Datsun pickup or station wagon, we drove over to see your brother.
No. We drove to meet your mother, to meet up with your mother. We had the 2 kids with us.
Well, then we must have seen her twice then. And then the last time I saw her was when she died. I flew over there.
And there are pictures of Sally and you when Sally was a young teenager
That's
on
probably
9th Street.
that's when she came out to my grandparents' house.
But she wasn't pregnant then.
She was a teenager. Yeah, she got pregnant young. She was pretty wild too. That's about it. Anybody else got any questions? Oh, and then I went to work for. I remember I went to work for Sears and part-time in the automotive department, and then I needed more money because I was living by myself at that time and going to Chaffey College. And so I got a job as a box boy at Mayfair Market on Central Avenue. And the manager told me, he said, this is a union store and you have 30 days to join the union. And I said, I'm not real enthused about unions. And so I had to go to the meeting, and they somehow found out that I worked for Sears. And so they started on me and they said, well, would you help us get a union into Sears, which they've been trying for years and years. And I said, no, I don't think so. They said, why not? And I said, as far as I'm concerned, the union is just another form of socialism. And I said, I'm not in favor of them. I said, the only reason I'm here is Joe, the manager, said I had to join the union to keep this job as a box boy. And so after the meeting was over, there were a bunch of young guys in there getting oriented to, I wasn't the most popular guy at the meeting, by the way. The guy that ran the meeting came with me, he says, you really don't want to join this union, do you? And I said, no. He said, well, I'll call Joe up and tell him to let you finish out the 30 days. So in essence, he fired me. I remember that about working. Then I went to work for SureFit part-time, seat covers, and then Montgomery Ward's part-time. And then we got married. And so then I went to work full-time at SureFit, and I think I worked for them for 5 years, and then opened up an upholstery shop in the Ford dealer in Upland.
You worked out of the garage too.
Well, that was, and we bought a house in Montclair, and I had a sewing machine, bought a sewing machine, and I worked out of the garage at night and on the weekends, and went to work for this Ford dealer, and then Randall's Upholstery came up for sale, and he put me and Ken Jitter together. Kenny and I used to work together at SureFit, and we raced motorcycles together. And anyhow, we worked out a deal, and we bought Wayne Randall out, and we were there for 2 years, and then this building became available across the street from Johnson Marine that used to be a canvas store.
Now, when you bought out Randall's, didn't you say you tried to borrow money from your rich uncle?
Yeah. I needed $2,400, I think it was. I tried to borrow money from my grandfather, and he said, I'll match anything your dad will give you, because he knew he wasn't going to loan me any money. And so finally, that was when there was a savings and loan on like gas stations there. Every corner had one. So I went in there, and I'm glad you brought that up. This guy was about the same age as I was, 26, 27, something like that. And went in there with her, and he said, well, what are you going to do with the money? And I told him all that kind of stuff, and filled out the credit app and all. And he leans back in his chair, and he goes like this and looks at us, and he says, well, Jim, what are we gonna do with you? You son of a bitch. But I had my cool and I said, well, I hope you make the right decision, loan us the money. And he did, and I walked out of there, and I don't know if she remembers or not, but I told her, I said, I'll never, ever be in that position again. And I never was. So anyhow, Kenny and I bought the business. We stayed there for 2 years. The building across the street from Johnson Marine became vacant. That was a canvas shop, so we moved in there and actually took over what business he had. And went from automobile upholstery to doing boat covers. And there's no school for any of that stuff. You just look at whatever people are doing and try to do it better, try to duplicate it or make it better. And then they built a restaurant in Upland called Magnolia Peach on Errol and Mountain Avenue. And they called me up, see if I wanted to do the awnings, because we were listed under canvas in the yellow pages. Never done an awning in our life. And so there was a bunch of awnings in Pomona. So I drive over there at night and walk around and look at it. And this would be before Polaroids and stuff like that, so you didn't take pictures, you had to wait a week to get them. But I'd make sketches and then go through books and such. And we got the job and did all threaded pipe awnings, which were still popular in those days, but they're switching over to welded frames. And that got us in the awning business. And just kept going and bidding jobs, and became a contractor in '81, I think it was. Got my contractor's license. And recession hit. We decided that we were going to buy some property and build our own building in 77 or 78, something like that. And started salting money away and bought the property where the building that I used to own is sitting now. And then started arranging interest and loans and such. And this was in 80 and 81, or 81 and 82, I think it was, right when inflation was really going crazy. And we got a construction loan at 9%, I think it was, which was good for 6 months. And we had hit an El Nino year, which means that it got a lot of rain, and so they couldn't do certain things during this rainy period. So the construction loan went on for 8 months. So, make a long story short, when the building was finally finished and I was ready to get final financing, the interest rate was 13%.
Wow.
Just unbelievable. And the kids today are talking about, God, I got to pay 4.5% to buy a house. You know, But anyhow, we moved into the building in the middle of a recession. At that time, I still had Kenny as a partner, and looked at each other and go, what the hell did we do? You know, we had this big payment and insurance and everything, taxes, and I got a phone call from a contractor, and he said, I'm at this Safeway, or actually it was a Food Mart or something like that. It was a subsidiary of Safeway down on Euclid Avenue, and he says, I need some information on awnings. Can you come down? I said, yeah, I'll be right down. Because we weren't doing anything. So I jumped in the truck and drove down there, and there was a bunch of suits there from Safeway, suits being office people, and they started picking my brain about stuff and what they wanted to do, and they had been doing it in Canada, I guess, and they wanted to get it going in California. So I said, yeah, we can do it. And a few days went by, and they called me up again, and they said, can you come back now? We'd like to talk to you some more. I said, sure. So this was on a Monday, I think, when they called me. And they said that they are the district managers that were in the store, and the regional manager is coming in on the weekend. And we'd like to have this thing up and in place to show him what we want to do. Can you do it? I said, yeah. They had no idea how to do it. So Kenny and I both were pretty good designers, and we got together and got the thing up, and we got it all up on a Friday, and he called me up Saturday morning and he says, I need to talk to you again. So I went down there, and he said, you know, just kind of plain green. And I said, well, that's what you wanted. And he said, yeah, but can you put some stripes in it? Some white stripes. And I said, yeah, but all we can do is glue them on there. I don't know how long it's going to last. And he said, if it gets it through the weekend, that's fine. So I went back to the shop and cut all these white strips and went down there and glued them on the canopy. And from there on, we did 150 stores.
The reason I asked about your uncle is I thought that when you asked to borrow money from him, and he said that he would never lend money for a partnership.
Yeah, the rich uncle.
Yeah.
The guy that owned Wabash Life Insurance. I asked him, and he said, I went to the Second World War, and I've seen guys save each other's lives, and they get out and they want to start a partnership, and it doesn't last because money divides people. And he says, if you want to go it alone, he says, I'll loan you all the money you want. And I said, well, I can't do that. I already committed, which is kind of dumb on my part. But, yeah, he wouldn't loan me any money under those conditions.
Right.
Yeah. So anyhow, we went into business and built that building, and I bought Kenny out in 1992, and then I ended up selling the business in 2005 to a couple of employees, and the Great Recession hit, and they'd also, 2 years after I sold them the business, they bought the building, which was in the contract. They had the option to buy. And the Great Recession hit, and they had hard economic times, but the one partner was going through a divorce because he couldn't keep his zipper up, and he was scounding with money. We estimated he ran off with between 150 and 200,000, and so it just put the remaining partner between a hard spot and a rock, and finally had to foreclose on the building and help Juan out. And we carried him for 3 to 6 months, something like that, until he could get going again. And then that did work out, and I had to sell the building again.
Treated him like a son.
Yeah, I did.
We met him for breakfast, the whole family, and
Yeah.
I talked to her about what she was getting into, and everything was fine and dandy, and then never got paid.
No. And forced me to sell at a bad time economic-wise. So I could have hung on for another year. I would have picked up another $500,000 with no problem.
And a lesson to be learned there. He trusted Juan, so he didn't do a contract. It was shaking hands.
Yep.
So we had no way to get it back.
No, my mistake. That's the way business used to be run. Back in the day, a man was his word, his bond. Not that way anymore. Is there anything else?
So that's the life and times of Jim Regan.
I got a question.
Okay.
What is one thing you hope everyone who comes in contact with you in your life takes away and learns from you?
Well, I'll tell you what my granddad
Make a contract.
what my granddad instilled for me was one thing. He says, remember, there's no free lunches. If something looks like it's too good to be true, it is. And today, to extend that a little bit further, because of the internet and all that kind of stuff, never give anybody any personal information unless you're standing there talking to them and know exactly who you're talking to. Another thing my grandfather always told me, he said that when you take a job from a man, you owe him two things. You owe him a day's work, no matter what he's paying you, and you want to learn and do that job the best you possibly can, because you never know, later on in life, you may need that skill. And that's something that I've always carried. Mm-hmm. And education isn't the cure-all. What is a cure-all is ambition and common sense. And that if you have ambition and common sense, you will get ahead. Other than that, that's all the philosophy I got.
Something you told me when I was younger, maybe when I was going through my screw-off stages, I'm giving this last name to you in good shape, so to speak, that, and, you need to keep it, keep the Regan name.
Oh, I don't remember saying
I
that.
don't remember how you worded it, but something like that, like, hey, this is,
Good, I was a philosophical son of a gun, wasn't I?
like, I'm handing this name off to you, and you need to keep it in good shape, basically.
So don't screw up.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that's the words I live by. I'm an anti-socialist. I think nobody owes you a dollar, nobody owes you a living. You make out of life what you put into life, and just like I say, no free lunches. You work for every nickel you get. I've never collected any disability, workers' comp, unemployment. The only thing that I've ever taken from the government is Social Security, and I paid into that, and Medicare. You know, but anyhow, that's it. Yep. That's all, folks. I gotta go take a leak.
Nice way to end it.